We're going to start off with some real right wing, stupid BS. This is coming from owner, proprietor, and genius that came up with the logic that if your house is underwater in Florida, don't worry about it. Just sell it. Just sell it. Once it's underwater, just sell it. You can just move. Doesn't really matter. The environment's not real. Climate change is not real. And that, of course, comes from our wonderful friend, the proprietor of the Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro, who has some unique thoughts about wages, specifically wages and salaries in blue states. And we're going to get to the difference between red and blue states very soon here today as we talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene wanting a divorce from us. Boo-hoo. Oh, no. But here is Ben Shapiro giving his take on wages.
Well, I mean, first of all, the wage to cost of living gap would not exist in the absence of regulation and subsidy, at least not nearly as much. The fact of the matter is that one of the reasons you have housing shortages in blue areas is because of development restrictions that are largely created by the left.
He was right. I'm pausing him here because he was right up until he said developed by the left. Restrictions on housings are put up in cities and in towns. I mean, you could look at the town I live in. Even though Democrats control councils or they control, I mean, typically cities and boroughs have councils. So let's just roll with it. Mayors don't usually have impacts on this necessarily, but in some cases they do. Let's talk about the average city, the average town. The council decides with the planning commission or the zoning commissions how they zone and plan cities. Now, when we look at this from the abstract, and he says the left. So to Ben Shapiro, everybody that is considered a Democrat is the left. Leftists, social democrats like myself, or even people to my left, socialists and whatnot, are not advocating for discriminatory housing that is raising the value of housing arbitrarily to keep people out. Because guess what? The people that typically align themselves left of center, and I'd probably say left of the Democratic Party or the left end of the left flank of the Democratic Party, are typically the people that struggle to own real estate or don't own real estate or will never earn real estate or understood and saw the struggle of owning and getting real estate, myself included. Even though now I own a home, all of my friends, everybody that I know that is a millennial is like struggling to find rentable places, let alone to buy. I just have the luxury of having a realtor as a mom. So, sometimes you step in shit, but not always the case. Not always the case.
The reason that you have massive inflation right now is, again, because of left-wing financial policy.
Wrong. The inflation that is caused right now is not by, because he's going to say it's by spending. We talked about this last week. Go check out last week's episode covering the modern monetary theory and the deficit myth, which is, the book written on that. But inflation is not caused by increases in spending from the government side, because one, a lot of the big bills that him and the right wing talk about, right? Like they want to blame it on, the Inflation Reduction Act or on the infrastructure package or whatever it is. A lot of that money hasn't actually been spent yet, first of all. Second of all, if you go way back, you talk about the CARES Act, you talk about the American Rescue Plan. Yeah, these are massive spending bills, but these were things that helped bolster the economy in a time of economic destruction and catastrophe, frankly. And I'm citing both of them because one of them was under President Trump and one of them was under President Biden. So there's not like a partisan divide there. The Fed is not controlled by the president either. So let's also remember that. The Fed is an independent body. So saying all this nonsense is just made up. It is not true. Inflation right now is caused by supply shortages.
It tends to be that wages move in tandem with costs, generally speaking.
Historically not accurate.
Because again, there is no such thing as a non-living wage. Nobody dies.
This is the main crux of the argument here. So I'm going to rewind that for a second. But here's the main piece of this clip as I talk for 5 minutes over a 40-second clip. Shapiro is arguing that where you live, your wage will adjust to it. Rather than thinking it's the other way around, right? Rather than saying, okay, if you have a high wage, rents and mortgages and all that stuff will be higher. He's saying that if you live in a city with a high cost of living, it must be the case that your wage goes up. Now, in the abstract, yes, that is the case. But that does not mean that, oh, we have Philadelphia where it's a higher cost of living, and that means that everybody there is living off of the minimum wage, or frankly, nobody could live off the minimum wage. I think Philadelphia does have a technically higher minimum wage than Pennsylvania, but I will remind everybody that is watching this that the Pennsylvania and the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. That is minuscule. And when people talk about raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, because remember, that number is also, let's be honest here, out of date. But even arguing for a $15 an hour minimum wage adjusted today, you know, we're not talking about a lot of money. You're talking about like $26,000 or something like that, if I'm doing the math correctly, really quickly. Like you're talking about minuscule wage increases on the average, but it would be astronomically important to those people that are at that level. You know, you're functionally doubling somebody's wage. So let's hear him out now.
There is no such thing as a non-living wage. Nobody dies on their wage. And that is not a thing that happens inside the United States. This is why when people say living wage, the question is, well, what do you mean by a non-living wage? Do you just mean a wage that you don't think is high enough? And for what job? And what does the market look like? Well,
so here, it's going to go back now. So now let's just look and kind of try, like, in all good faith, right? Steel man this argument. What is he trying to say? He is saying in America, you're not going to die with a job. You're not going to die off of your wage. Maybe. But what he is failing to acknowledge, beyond the fact that people do die and they literally live on the streets because they can't afford housing, what he fails to acknowledge is that because of benefits like SNAP that provide food for people in need, or, you know, vouchers for food, because of programs like Medicaid and Medicare that provide healthcare to people when they are either, you know, elderly or, you know, hit a threshold of poverty. Ignoring programs like housing assistance, like housing vouchers, these are things that exist largely in blue cities, largely in blue states, that help and develop things more for people in those areas than they do in the red states. Because remember, red states eat up and suck up more tax dollars than they put in, vice versa for blue states. So all of this is to say, Shapiro is trying to say, we don't need to have a minimum wage. We don't need to have all this stuff because you're not going to die. The only reason why people are able to make it in America when their wages, well, because remember that Walmart and maybe Amazon has taken over this, title, but Walmart is the single largest employer with their employees receiving SNAP benefits. So what that functionally means is because they are paying their workers a starvation wage, a wage that cannot provide for their family, they have to receive government assistance to buy the food within Walmart. That is the insanity. And all of this is to say that Shapiro won't acknowledge that you don't die in America because of the minimum wage or because of a wage, solely because of the fact that we have these programs that exist. But when you push him harder, he does not want those programs to exist. So it's a safe thing to say, oh, we don't need, it's the same thing with the comparisons to the Scandinavian models of economics. Now, people always want to say, oh, the Scandinavian countries are super, super socialist, or they're super, super capitalist. No, they're social democracies. They provide safety nets for their people, and they have strong worker protections, and they don't need a federal minimum wage necessarily because nobody's working at what would be considered a starvation wage, or the amount of people that are significantly lower, and maybe you could advocate for a minimum wage there, but it's not the same. It's not even close to being the same.